One day, Jesus entered a synagogue where he was offered an opportunity to teach. You can find this story in Luke chapter 6. But this wasn't just any ordinary day, it was the Sabbath. And there were specific regulations about what one could and could not do on the Sabbath. So when Jesus encountered a man in the synagogue whose right hand was withered, the religious leaders took notice and they watched what Jesus might do. Their shared sense of outrage was ignited when Jesus reached out and healed the man, claiming that it was lawful to do good on the Sabbath. But the leaders saw it differently. For them, this was an act nothing more than a flagrant violation of Sabbath law. Now, for Jesus, the healing was a sign of God's kingdom. For the leaders, it was a sign of religious disregard. They saw the sign, but they lacked wonder. There would be no reflection on what was really happening right in front of their eyes. And their interpretation of the sign was actually an act of deflection. If they could turn people's attention to the violation, then the value of the healing might just fade into insignificance. And that's how deflection works. If people's focus can be moved away from an act or an event to something consequential or even tangential to it, then the thing itself is diminished in its value. So we see in the story that a man's hand is restored, but the value of the healing is disregarded because of Sabbath violation. In our day and time, there are protests about police brutality and racism, but the value of the reason for the protests is diminished when attention is diverted into the resulting and tragic violence and looting. And we see today people cry out, Black Lives Matter. But the outcry is muffled when it is subsumed by the counter cry, all lives matter. We see signs of injustice, and such signs should also produce the kind of wonder that opens our eyes and our hearts to the pain and the suffering of others. But deflection diverts our attention in such a way that the sign is then reinterpreted, it is diminished, or it is subsumed, and wonder becomes irrelevant. Deflection, in a way, is a kind of art form. It can be helpful at a Thanksgiving dinner when your weird uncle wants to tell everyone about his recent UFO sightings, and deflecting the conversation toward his interest in collecting rare coins or in brewing beer might just save the family gathering from disruption and anguish. But deflection can also be strategically employed in order to turn people's attention from very real and important issues. The most effective aspect of such deflection is the legitimacy of the claims made by the deflectors. Yes, it was true that Jesus' work of healing took place on the Sabbath. Yes, it is true that violence and looting are destructive acts. Yes, it is true that all human lives are of value. But the art of deflection starts a new conversation that produces a kind of fog that hides the real issues from view and makes them irrelevant. The restored hand is irrelevant because it was restored on the wrong day, on the Sabbath. Police brutality and racism becomes irrelevant because violence and looting took place during some of the protests. The value of Black lives is irrelevant because the value of everyone else's lives swallows the violation of Black lives into an abyss of disinterest. You know, people of faith in particular should not allow deflection to take priority over reflection. When we see the signs of injustice, we must allow wonder to emerge so that we see with open eyes and we hear with open ears. Deflection closes us to the possibilities that the cries for justice that we hear may actually be invitations to enter into the work of God's kingdom by his Spirit. It should be the people of God who are among the first to respond to those signs and who do not allow the masters of deflection to have their way. As Jesus said to his detractors, when it is evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. May we, as ones seeking to bear witness to Christ, to the presence and reality of God's kingdom, be ones who interpret the signs of the times by the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit.